All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight we have the council workshop for Monday, December 6th at 7 p.m. My name is Mike Little, Mayor of the District of North Vancouver, and so the pleasure falls to me to welcome everybody here to our workshop. This workshop is taking place in a hybrid fashion. Members of council, staff, and the public will be participating through both in-person and virtual means. And I'm having some technical difficulties with my iPad here, so we'll do our best to mix the old tech with the new. But for council members raising their hand, it may be a few minutes before I can actually see your hands being raised in the electronics. So if you can raise your hand to your camera, I'll do my best to respond to that until it's sorted out. Or Jim, for you, you can do it in the old-fashioned way here in the hall. We have two items up for discussion for the regular for the workshop tonight, but I'll start first with adopting the agenda. Are there any errors or omissions from the agenda as presented? Hearing none, will someone move adoption of the agenda? I've got moved by Councillor Hanson, second by Councillor Back. Call the question on the matter. All those in favor? Contrary minded, motion carries. We have no minutes, and so we're going to move straight into the reports from council or staff. The first item up is the Slow Streets Initiative. And at this time, as I don't have a view of my my list yet, as my system's all restarting here, I believe it's Mr. Ono that's going to introduce the item. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Worship, that's correct.
Welcome.
Thank you, Your Worship. Members of Council, thank you for the opportunity to partake in our annual transportation workshop. And as you know, this is our opportunity to work with you to seek your direction on priorities for the next year for the transportation section. This evening, it's also our opportunity to provide you with an update on progress being made in the priority areas previously directed by Mayor and Council. And so this evening, we'll start with an overview to be provided by our Section Manager of Transportation, Mr. Steve Carney. So he's with me online here today, this evening, and he'll provide you with some snapshots on some of the fairly exciting things happening, like the Second Narrows interchanges, which is, after many, many years, coming close to completion. And that project, of course, also has a great many bike and pedestrian improvements negotiated into the project with the Ministry of Transportation. We'll also, following that overview, we will be requesting council for direction on some really meaty topics. One of them is our Vision Zero or Slow Streets initiative, which is actually the Slow Streets is a component of Vision Zero, and that'll be presented by our Mr. Brendan James, who's our new Transportation Demand Management Coordinator. He's going to provide an overview, and then we are aware that some members of council are very interested in this topic. It can be fairly resource intensive, though, not in this first year. So we're proposing it in two steps. The first would be just to really flesh out the initiative and then report back to you with options about how we could make it happen. And so this evening, we'll just be looking for council's direction on whether or not to do that initial planning stage in 2022 and then bring options back for 2023 for implementation of possibly a pilot or full implementation. Following Brendan's presentation, we would be moving on to Ingrid Weisenbach, who's our transportation planner, and she'll be providing you with an overview of the status of previously directed priority cycling initiatives. And then she'll be seeking some direction on one of our priority bike routes, which is the Lynn Valley Road Active Transportation project, and specifically timing. So we've broken it up into two phases that are bite-sized and manageable, but we are looking for some direction from council on how best to implement that project. So what we'd propose is that we provide opportunity for discussion after each speaker, because there is quite a bit of material to cover. And with that, Your Worship, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Carney to start the evening off.
Yeah,
Thanks.
so I'm just going to put a couple more comments in. So just to be clear about the workshop format for council, what we use the workshop for is to get council informed about a policy, the impact of the policy, to get some general feedback from the council, to potentially revise the plan for when it actually goes to a regular meeting of council for official direction from the council. And so tonight, I'd encourage all members of council to ask their questions, clarify things, share your general views on things or how you would propose to make it better or different if you so wish. But there will not be a formal vote of council at the end of this workshop on the directions. That will go to a regular meeting of council for a proper decision in a regularly convened council meeting. It won't take place at the end of the workshop. So just to be clear about that expectation. And that would apply to both matters. But other than that, thank you. Take it away, Mr. Carney.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Steve, for the introduction. Can you please confirm that you can see the first slide here of the presentation?
Confirm that I can see the DNV Transportation Annual Workshop slide.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight we are here to share with you an update on the work undertaken by DNV Transportation in 2021. And as mentioned by Steve, we also hope to receive input on two possible initiatives for 2022. I will begin the workshop with a presentation on 2021 highlights. And as mentioned by Mr. Ono, this will be followed by a presentation on possible Slow Streets initiative by Brendan James, followed by a third presentation by Ingrid on cycling and specifically the Lynn Valley Road active transportation project. Do you see the second slide? Am I advancing here?
Yes.
Excellent. In early 2021, transportation worked closely with community planning, facilities, engineering, finance, and others in the preparation of the OCP action plan. Through this work, a number of transportation-based priority actions were identified, and these include the desire to deliver sustainable and diverse housing and transportation choices, to advance rapid transit, to make transit faster and more reliable on major routes, and to implement a continuous and connected network of walking and cycling routes. There were also a number of supporting actions that touched on road safety through a Vision Zero approach, leveraging emerging technologies, promoting transportation demand management, and also promoting transit and active transportation. In October of 2021, so just a couple of months ago, we launched North Shore Connects, and this is a partnership between the District of West Vancouver, the Squamish Nation, the city, the district, and the Tsleil-Waututh Nation on the North Shore. We are working collectively to improve transportation on, to, and from the North Shore, and so this is really building on the work or the foundation laid by InStep. I think the key difference here between North Shore Connects and InStep is that North Shore Connects is really directed by the local North Shore governments, with TransLink, MOT, and the federal government being valued partners. However, again, the priority setting is set by the 5 local North Shore governments. North Shore Connects consists of a technical working group and also a steering committee comprised of the mayors and First Nations elected officials. The ultimate goal of North Shore Connects is really to deliver a greater diversity of transportation choices, including sustainable options to foster long-term livability and prosperity for our community. In the press release photo here, we have from left to right, Patrick Stafford Smith with the North Shore Chamber, North Vancouver Chamber, Mayor Buchanan with the City of North Vancouver, Councillor Kilsalem with Squamish First Nation. We have Bowen Ma, MLA for North Vancouver, Mayor Booth, West Vancouver, Mayor Little, Councillor Thomas with the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, and also Minister Jonathan Wilkinson. Member of Parliament. One of the top priorities for North Shore Connects is to build regional support and advance planning for rapid transit to the North Shore. So earlier in 2021, we did some modeling work through one of our consultants and determined that ridership forecasts are in the order of 110,000 a day. So this is a really strong performing line. And this would be utilizing a second Narrows crossing, as you can see in the slide here. That was for the purple alignment, so a Park Royal to Metrotown alignment. The gold alignment was Park Royal to Waterfront, and it was also quite, in terms of performance, performed very well. We forecasted a $500 million annual benefit with this, North Shore Rapid Transit. So pretty substantial, compelling business case, actually. And most of that is related to travel time savings. There was also a $90 million in savings from road collision costs, the ability to generate about 43,000 jobs on the North Shore, and obviously, would result in a reduction in GHGs and reduced congestion through a mode shift to transit. So pretty compelling case, and we're working now, like I say, with other municipalities south of the Burrard Inlet to build support. Also happening in 2021 is TransLink's T2050, or Transport 2050, long-term transportation planning strategy. And so it's really a 30-year strategy for the region. The Burrard Inlet Rapid Transit is now in the T2050, and we're actually working now to advance it into the next 10-year investment plan for the region. That won't be determined until spring of 2022, but it is something that we're working towards. Good news on FIBS. So FIBS now is, this project has been sort of on and off for the past couple of years, but the good news is that we have secured federal funding, and we are expecting to tender, or the ministry will be tendering and leading the project, but we've been quite involved in the technical reviews. And we expect that the project will be tendered in January, late January or early February 2022, with an 18-month construction schedule. And so this is a partnership between the province, the government of Canada, so the feds, TransLink, and the district. This will be really a great, once complete, a gateway to the Lynn Creek Town Centre, and for many, the district of North Vancouver. The emphasis in the design is really a sort of a people-oriented design, and so that means many upgrades to improve comfort and safety, accessibility, shelters, lighting. There'll be a cafe, washrooms, etc. And also improved, I would say, integration with the neighboring town center through active cycling and walking connections. So we're quite excited about that, and we're looking forward for it to break ground. Like I say, in early 2022, we expect. 2021, we also launched the Lynn Canyon Pay Parking Pilot. So this is a 2-year pay parking pilot that we implemented as per council direction received in December of 2020, so just a year ago now. The pilot is really considered a transportation demand management initiative, with the revenues going back into DNV parks. Despite the closure of the suspension bridge for much of the season this year, we did still collect revenues in the order of 170,000. And so we're hopeful we're pretty confident by the end of the pilot that we'll have recuperated all costs related to the pay parking infrastructure. Sorry, just one more point on the Lynn Canyon Pay Parking Pilot. We are collecting a lot of data through the pay parking kiosks, and staff are still in the process of compiling and analyzing, and we will be putting together an information report to council once all of the analysis is complete. And so you can expect that in the new year. Transportation staff have been leveraging technology to improve fire and emergency services and most specifically incident response times. And we're doing that through traffic signal emergency vehicle preemption systems. And so to date, we have 9 locations where we've implemented signal preemption for emergency vehicles. And so really the technology here is the emergency vehicles have like a transponder, and can communicate with the traffic signals. And so they essentially can preempt the traffic signal so that they hit the green lights. And so it speeds up response times and again, improves safety for our emergency services workers. We are also working with the city and the ministry on what I would call cross-jurisdictional traffic signal coordination. So trying to better coordinate traffic signals across those jurisdictional boundaries. And so most of our interchanges, we have, the scenario where you go from sort of a municipal jurisdiction to the ministry and then back to municipal. And so this cross-jurisdictional coordination is really important to get that, that improved traffic flow across these boundaries, and particularly around the interchange footprints. Currently, we have about 85% of our signals are connected, and we can communicate with remotely. And so we're working towards getting essentially them all online so that we can troubleshoot and monitor and adjust as needed. There's quite a number of active transportation improvements delivered in 2021. So on the slide here, I don't know if you can read the font there, but there's a list, and they are primarily smaller projects. For example, accessible transit projects. So this would typically include small sidewalk projects. We've got some road safety projects, corner bulges, new crosswalks and crosswalk upgrades. And so quite a few locations received relatively smaller to moderate sized improvements. We secured over $1.3 million in funding in 2021 through from outside agencies, primarily TransLink, Coast Mountain Bus, and ICBC, and also about $60,000 for studies. So we're continuing to work with our partners on delivering some of these smaller but important projects. Some of the accessible transit projects would include, like I mentioned, smaller sidewalk segments or shelters or concrete platforms, waiting platforms. Here's just a few examples of some of these projects. Again, typically smaller sections of sidewalk and bulges. Yeah, and in addition to the sort of the transit related stuff, there was a number of improvements around schools and other high pedestrian generators. 2021, we're very close now to substantial completion for the Lower Lynn interchange project. So very excited about that. We know that the traffic is really still in the process of redistributing over the network with the new interchange configurations, and so we do expect it will take some time for it to stabilize and to balance. In addition to that, not all of the queue detection systems are online. So we spoke with the ministry last Thursday, and what they said is that early this week we can expect to have all those systems online for queue detection, and that'll, I think, really help to balance the green time or the queuing between Main and Dollarton in particular. At the same time, we're monitoring signals and queuing and delays and adjusting signal timing plans as needed to optimize the system. As part of this project, there is quite a few improvements to safety, just bringing the interchanges up to modern standards, much improved east-west connectivity, increased westbound capacity, and I would say optimized eastbound configuration given the constraint of the Ironworkers Bridge. And so we knew there was always going to be some delay in the eastbound. And so we're just really working to really optimize the configuration given that constraint. As mentioned, as part of this project, there was substantial improvements to the active transportation network within here in the slide. We're showing the Mountain Interchange and also the Keith Road Interchange. And so you can see quite a few improved connections there for cycling and walking. Down at Dollarton, we have similar improvements to cycling and walking, as mentioned in the previously with FIBS there. This will enable us to extend the Spirit Trail across the highway further east, along with upgraded connections to Lynn Creek Town Center, FIBS, and the Ironworkers Memorial Bridge. It was a busy year. We also have been working with the ministry on an upper levels corridor study. And so this is really a review of the corridor from Horseshoe Bay to Lynn Valley. It doesn't include the bridge, but we're going to be asking for that next. But it's it's primarily, the scope is focused on people moving capacity. So we are looking at things like a bus on shoulder systems. Also some other configurations with the interchanges to improve, again, safety and active transportation connections, primarily across the highway. We just received a draft report last week, so I haven't gone through it in great detail, but happy to provide as much information as I can at this time. And we are hopeful that in the near term, we can see improvements at both the Capilano Road and the Lynn Valley Road interchanges. Again, safety-related improvements, primarily lengthening some of the ramps, and also active transportation improvements for connectivity across the interchange footprints. And so that concludes the presentation on the 2021 update. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, Council. Any questions on the generic update before we get into the specific discussion items tonight? Councillors Murray and Bond. Councillor Murray, go ahead. You're muted, Councillor.
Sorry. Has there been any discussion about the bridge over Capilano Road on Highway 1 heading west? The overpass, what's happening with that piece of infrastructure?
Yes, there has been discussions. And so if I'm not mistaken, what is in the upper levels corridor study involves a twinning of that bridge. And that really would, what that would do is, as you know, that bridge right now is a 4-lane bridge, and there's really no room for the westbound on-ramp from Capilano. And so that's the yield. That's really, I'll call it a nasty
Really
yield.
nasty. And it's a really old bridge. Yeah.
Yeah. And we know from the collision statistics that this is a hotspot. And so the concept would twin the bridge. And so that would provide a continuous westbound on-ramp of standard length. And then I believe one lane would also be dedicated for active transportation connections. And so you'd have a full standard, call it a multi-use path. You'd have 4 travel lanes plus the auxiliary lane, I believe is the configuration for that interchange. So really substantial improvements. And then there's other across the interchange footprint. The bike lanes were extended along Capilano Road as well. And then
and what's the timing of the replacement of that overpass over Capilano Road? Because it just like it's feeling bumpier than usual. And
yeah, I don't have that information. They didn't put a date to the construction like of a twin structure. I believe they just categorized it as near term, and so
okay.
No hard dates on that.
And then my other question would be, heading eastbound on Mount Seymour Parkway at Superstore in that outside lane, when you're heading west at Lillooet Road and you're wanting to go west on the highway. So you haven't crossed Lillooet Road yet. That outside lane, you know, it's a shame that we didn't cut an extra lane going up to the demonstration forest or up to Cap U. It's pretty heavy most days, and the light just doesn't clear the whole load. And right now what's happening is people are sitting in the center lane, and then they, because there's 2 lanes heading over the Fern Street overpass, right? And what's becoming the norm is people are sitting in the center and the outside lane or the inside lane, and then they're just going to try to gun it and move into that lane heading on to Highway 1, because the lineup, you don't get through the light. You know, if you've crossed the Seymour River Bridge, you don't get to the light. And the other thing that's happening is on the Seymour River Bridge, if you're stuck on the Seymour River Bridge and you're stuck in that lane, people are now doing left-hand turns at Seymour Boulevard to go towards the Superstore, doing a quick U-turn and then getting into the left-hand turn lane and beating the queue because it's faster. You know, it's just that big wide sidewalk that was built there. It was too bad we couldn't have cut it in a little bit more and then made a right-hand turn up to Lillooet. So I mean, the solution, I guess, is lengthening the light to be able to solve that problem. But it is getting a little bit dicey in there.
Through your worship, I can provide just a real quick response. We have been in discussions with the ministry about installing a no U-turn sign at that location, and also looking at updating the or adjusting the signal timing plan at Lillooet.
I think the signal timing, I'm not sure if the sign's going to do it, but I wish, but I don't think it's going to do it. And then my last question would be on Dollarton. Well, both directions. We know we have problems with the alternating light on the bridge. The queue is lengthy, challenging. I was in it one day for nearly 20 minutes. Stopped at the Dollarton Bridge. Took me 20 minutes to get onto the merge on the Second Narrows Bridge. And I thought, oh no, what's happened on the highway? Nothing. It was moving fast. It was not backed up. There was no slowdowns. It would have been faster if I got out, stopped for a coffee, and then gotten back up onto the Parkway and accessed it. So it was really a bit pokey. But coming into the Seymour, equally is challenging. That left turn lane on Dollarton at Old Dollarton, right in front of Tim Hortons and Colony. It's failing. It's not long enough. The light is just a regular light. There's no left-hand turn light. And the left-hand turn is filling up because the light's not long enough to clear the load. And then the center lane is backed up because everybody's stuck behind the car that just squeezed in but can't quite fit. And then the traffic on the outside lane's too fast and it's dangerous to move over. So I think we've got to try to address that little area, whether we put a left-hand turn lane and then clear the load or pull it out. I don't know. If, there's that little median there, and if there was a yellow crosshatch, you could just sit in the crosshatch instead of being bumped out by that cement median. Those are my traffic observations. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Bond, Councillor Hanson, Councillor Forbes, and Councillor Back. Councillor Bond.
Thanks, Mayor Little. Mr. Carney, I'm wondering, maybe following on Councillor Murray's comment about the alternating on-ramp light. I wondered why we had that type of signal operation at that on-ramp instead of a traditional one that you might see in a ramp metering application where you have alternating yields. And, a couple of people have asked me that, non-traffic engineers as well. But maybe can you explain the rationale for having the like a fully signalized ramp versus an alternating yield ramp at that location?
Through your worship, thank you, Councillor Bond. It's a great question. And to be honest, when I first was thinking about the interchange at the conceptual level, I did envision a more traditional ramp signal. Ultimately, it's the ministry's jurisdiction. And so we've provided input on, a lot of the operational aspects of it, but ultimately it is their decision. I'm just thinking if whether or not the transit priority played a role, because I know we do have transit priority at that location where buses exiting FIBS can receive the priority phasing. I think it's probably possible with just a sort of a green, red, and no amber signal. But again, it was at the end of the day the ministry's decision to implement a more traditional 3-color signal.
Okay, and then on the north side of Highway 1, the multi-use path connecting Lynn to Mountain Highway. On that upslope there, it's got a bit of a unique design where it's instead of a smooth path, it has these kind of flat concrete pads all the way up. Did you get do you have an explanation for why that design was chosen instead of a flat design?
Yeah, I believe it's related to accessibility. And so for wheelchair users, I think it's, to do with the length of the grade. And so, yeah, it's really not so much to accommodate the cyclists, but more so for, say, wheelchair users.
Is that something you've ever seen before, either on sidewalks or paths? I know we have a lot of hilly sidewalks in the district, and I'm just wondering. I'm wondering if that type of design, have you seen anything like that before?
I've seen resting areas on paths, but not. I think this one is unique in given its length. I haven't seen it where you've got so many at regular intervals, but again, it's a bit of a unique facility in that way, and so. Yeah, it's not common, but I think it's to conform to the accessibility requirements.
Okay. And on I guess the minor transportation improvements, the sidewalks and the crossings, the accessible transit projects, can you talk about how those are prioritized? Obviously, we have a lot of missing links and a lot of roads without sidewalks. Bus stops that are don't have enough room for people to get on and off the bus. So how are those projects chosen and funded, and then how much funding do we have for those types of projects every year in our current budget plans?
Yeah, thank you for the question. We do work with TransLink on identifying those high priority locations, and so we do have access to their data in terms of boardings and alightings, and so we know which bus stops are busy, and particularly it's for shelters, for example, you'd be looking at the boardings data to see where people are most likely to be waiting. We also, through the pedestrian master plan, have previously gone through a prioritization exercise with respect to sidewalks in terms of identifying, where they sit in terms of a ranking, so prioritization process. So we have that established essentially for most of the district. And the evaluation framework looked at a number of variables. So it was things like pedestrian volumes, proximity to schools, road classifications, traffic volumes. And so there's a number of factors that went into evaluating the ranking of these needs. And so in terms of the cost sharing, I believe there's a couple of TransLink programs that we use for the majority of these projects. That is the transit related road infrastructure, or we call it TRIP, the TRIP program, the Transit Related Road Infrastructure Program. And then there's also a WIT, which is a walking infrastructure to transit program. And I believe the cost sharing is a 50-50 cost share. And as I mentioned in my presentation, we received about 1.3 million for these types of projects in 2021. And so it's a great program that we're part of. And so that amount can vary. There's a couple of streams through the program. There's a sort of think of it as like a base allotted amount. And then there's also a competitive amount. So it depends on the attractiveness of the project. For the competitive portion, we'd be competing with other municipalities, but there is an allotted amount. So we do have a guaranteed sort of base amount that we can use every year for these type of improvements.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Councillor Hanson?
Yeah, thank you very much, Your Worship, and thank you, Mr. Carney, for that very broad and comprehensive summary of transportation initiatives. My question is focused on the Lower Lynn interchange project, the big picture. Obviously, the goals of the project are to achieve better east-west connectivity and access to ironworkers bridge. The project as a whole was held out as offering transportation improvement and making it easier to get around and easier to get from the North Shore onto the bridge and across the bridge. And with that introduction, Mr. Carney, my question is, each time we hear the project described and its results, we hear it's a tentative discussion that we have to wait for certain things to work, I guess we have to wait for it to be completed and then see how it works out overall. When, Mr. Carney, do you think what's the date when that project is complete and we'll be in a position to really assess its benefits overall to east-west connectivity and to accessing the bridge? At what point is that project going to be complete and we'll be able to monitor the results and benefits of the project? Thank you very much.
Thank you, through your worship. Thank you for the question, Councillor Hanson. As I mentioned, with the vehicle detection systems, we're expecting that to be installed this week, is what we've been told. I know there's a couple of other outstanding things that likely won't really impact traffic operations, such as the sound walls, and I believe that may be a couple of months before the final panels arrive. I think there was a delay in shipping. But I think in terms of the infrastructure required or necessary for traffic operations, I expect that to be complete this week. And so really then I think what happens is the traffic will to some degree redistribute. And so, for example, with the Keith Road interchange, we used to have a traffic signal there that allowed for movements from both westbound Mount Seymour Parkway and eastbound Keith Road to enter the highway to go eastbound onto the bridge. Now that signal has been removed and the eastbound left is no longer permitted. There's more capacity for people coming from Mount Seymour Parkway to get onto the highway using the Keith Road interchange relative to the previous condition. And so the reason I bring this up is because now that there's additional capacity in that area, what we expect is that in time, some of the traffic that is currently using the Dollarton interchange will migrate up to Keith Road to sort of better balance those delays. We are aware of the delays down at Dollarton, and so we're hopeful through having the detection systems online and traffic signals optimized given the volumes, and through a redistribution so that areas that are a little overtaxed migrate to areas that are, traffic from those areas migrate to other areas that are underutilized. There'll be, overall, it'll be improved performance. The one thing I do want to mention is that We are working within the constraints of the Ironworkers Bridge. And so, part of it is just trying to manage, expectations around what, the level of service will be. We know that at peak times, there's still going to be delays, but we're confident that the new configuration is much safer and really optimizes what we've got given the constraints that we have to work with there.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I appreciate if it can be safer, then there'll be less accidents and less delays. And there's all these different benefits that were put out to us. But I still, if I'll put the question again, is there a time when we can likely look at this and what we see is what we have in terms of transportation improvement? Is it next July? Is it at what point? Because we're hearing it as something on the horizon, as something that's going to improve transportation, east-west connectivity, and access to the bridge, reduce wait times and so forth. Are we there now, or at what point in time is what we see what we have in terms of the benefits that were derived from that project? Thank you.
Yeah, I think
if I may, Your Worship.
Steve, just to help answer that question, he's really asking, I think Councillor Hans is asking when we are going to have the evidence to show whether this was successful or not in terms of our objectives. So when are we going to gather enough data to be able to say this is what we were experiencing before and this is what we've got now? Is that a year from now?
Yeah, if I may, Your Worship, and Mr. Stewart, Your Worship, if I may. Thank you. So I think Mr. Stewart's right. I think what we can do is we can report back in about a year's time after we've had a full year of everything settling down. Most of the construction, other than the FIBS transit exchange, most of the work in the area is going to be done. I think, Your Worship, through you, what we'll see is a lot of the turbulence around the Fern Street interchange or the Keith Road interchange, the Mountain interchange, the Main Street interchange. A lot of that's going to smooth out. You're not going to have all that weaving happen, so you're not going to have all those little fender benders right at the foot of the cut that caused a lot of the backups. And I think so we'll see a lot of the ICBC information over the course of the next year come out that some of those accidents and delays are going to drop off the table. I think a lot of that traffic that used to come off the Ironworkers Memorial Bridge going northbound, it'll slip off to that collector distributor that's going northbound now. So all that traffic that used to try and weave on from Mount Seymour Parkway going up towards Lynn Valley, that used to duck into the highway and then have to duck back out onto Mountain Highway, all of that's gonna go away. So all that delay and all those rear enders that used to happen coming off the Ironworkers Bridge, I think a lot of that's gonna disappear. And I think that's where your big benefits are. Is you're not going to get those big backups that's going to then back up onto your east-west routes because people can't get onto the highway to make those moves. I think that's where you're going to see your big benefits. And like Mr. Carney says, this isn't solving the Ironworkers Bridge that's already operating at capacity and then some, where you're getting all that peak spreading. This is just to give us a bit of a chance that we won't have those accidents on the highway that are going to cause that prevent you from getting across the highway when you're just trying to stay on the North Shore. Thank you, Worship.
Mr. Ono. Okay, floor back to you, Councillor Hanson. Did you have any other further comments?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Forbes, your comments?
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a couple comments. Or questions, actually. I'll just switch my order around. We were just talking about the Seymour Blue Ridge area coming up to Lynn Valley and taking them off of the highway, which is great. And in theory, that should work. However, I can't count. I mean, I lost count of how many times when I'm going over the mountain highway overpass that those people are backed up, as far as I can see, back to Seymour. So I don't know. I think it's got something to do with if you're coming up Mountain Highway, there's 3 lights in a row there. And if you're not just quite right, it takes you a long time to get through those 3 lights and actually start coming up Mountain Highway, which I'm sure, because of those 3 lights for Mountain Highway, is delaying the people coming from Seymour. And then you get some of those people that are trying to get onto the highway that way, going straight through, or you get people that are trying to do the left turn there. So just a comment that I noticed that backup still happening, and is that going to get fixed with some of the things you've mentioned?
Through your worship, thank you.
Bob? Sorry.
Okay, Mr. Carney, your response?
Thank you, your worship. Yeah, thank you for the question, Councillor Forbes. If I understand correctly, from Blue Ridge area, so east of Seymour up towards Lynn Valley.
Yeah.
And so I know for quite a long time, what we called the collector distributor road. So that was the road that would link you directly from Mount Seymour Parkway going westbound onto Highway 1 and sort of to bypass the Mountain Highway interchange. So you would directly onto, so that there was for quite a while there, for probably a few months, there was a detour where all of that traffic had to go through the signal on Mountain Highway for the westbound ramps signal. And so that was a temporary condition. We were aware of the backups, but that was prior to that, the westbound, the collector distributor road opening. And so now that traffic no longer has to go through that signal. That intersection was never designed for that amount of volume. That was really just a temporary detour condition. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. What are the plans? I'm concerned about Mountain Highway. The last time I asked about if there were going to be improvements on Mountain Highway, I got told basically no, but I'm really concerned when the Mosaic development at Emery is finished. We've got about 400, I think it's roughly 400 potential people coming out onto Mountain Highway. And now we have finished most of the condos on the east side of the Lynn Valley Village, in between Mountain Highway and the Lynn Valley Center, I mean. And now there's a proposal for another development, which may be another 400. We don't know yet, but it's right sitting on 27th, which people will either go up to Lynn Valley or they'll come down to Mountain Highway. Mountain Highway can't handle that. I live in Kirkstone. Mountain Highway still gets backed up now without another 800. Roughly 800 units in coming onto Mountain Highway possibly. So what are the plans for Mountain Highway?
Through your worship, yeah, thank you, Councillor Forbes. We currently don't have any plans to increase capacity on Mountain Highway. There's always the opportunity to implement TDM initiatives, try and improve active transportation connections, transit. I know there has been talk of a potential rapid bus between Lynn Valley and Lonsdale Key, but we currently do not have plans to add additional vehicle lanes to Mountain Highway.
Could I request that?
If I can just add a couple of comments about the rapid bus option. So I think it's the R9 temporarily is what it's categorized as. It's one of the top ranked unfunded rapid bus lines. We're really optimistic that it has the best case to go forward and that we'll be able to have a rapid bus connection both up and down Lonsdale and over into Lynn Valley very soon.
Through your worship, if I may also add to the response to Councillor Forbes. Thank you, your worship. So in addition to Rapid Bus, which is actually a very important project, one of the things that was happening through you to Councillor Forbes is that we were seeing a lot of backup at I think it's the Keith and Brooksbank intersection. We don't have a lot of space left to keep on expanding the road capacity. So now one of the initiatives that I think Mr. Carney just mentioned was our all of the support that council provided to us in the past to implement a new traffic operations system. So I don't know if some of you recall the term Centrax. Well, that's the new brains behind our traffic signal system. And one of our very talented staff here has been working on a way to patch that through to work better or talk better with the ministry system and with the City of North Vancouver system. So a lot of that queue that was backing up from that left turn southbound Mountain Highway to Keith Road, that Mountain Highway at Brooksbank, actually, so it swings over to Brooksbank. That Brooksbank at Keith Road intersection is actually a City of North Vancouver intersection. Our old Mountain Highway at Keith Road intersection, which is now the Lynmouth intersection, that's a district intersection. So two different jurisdictions, two different signals. We now have the ability for our signal system to talk to the city's signal system. And so what this is giving us the chance to do now is to make sure that we have green time in our signal when the Brooksbank intersection has green time to make that left-hand turn go. So it's flushing that intersection through a lot more efficiently. So the system just went live, I think about a week and a half or 2 weeks ago. They're still optimizing it, but it's things like that we're doing in the background now that we're trying to maximize the capacity of the existing road space. Your worship, thanks.
Councillor
Thank
Forbes,
you.
final comments?
Thank you. But that I'm more concerned about what's going to happen between the overpass before you go over the highway. I'm concerned about Mountain Highway from there up to Lynn Valley Center, because you're going to have, like I say, there's still a few developments that aren't fully, people haven't moved into, and we're talking about another 800 that are going to be opting, and maybe half of those are cars. I don't know how many, but they're going to be opting to go on the road. So it's not even today's capacity. I'm talking about 3 years from now, and we need to be planning something for Mountain Highway. And the other thing along with that, I mean, I know we discussed putting bike routes on Mountain Highway, and I think there is some capacity to widen Mountain Highway a little bit, and perhaps shrink the lanes a little bit like we did on Lynn Valley Road, and have that Adderlyn. No, not anyway, have Arborlyn as the bicycle route so that we could expand Mountain Highway a little bit. Otherwise, I think we're just asking for everybody to get hurt on Mountain Highway, whether it's cars piling into cars, whether it's bicycle riders getting hit. So I just really am concerned about that. And that's over and above whatever we're seeing right now. That'll be more capacity in a very short time here. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. Councillor Back.
Thank you, Mayor Little. Thank you, Mr. Carney, for the presentation and all of the updates. Just a couple specific questions. I'm wondering on Lynn Valley Road, Boulevard Crescent, I guess it is before it turns into Lynn Valley Road, northbound under the highway there, where you've got traffic coming off of the highway. There was talk at one point about widening. I know it's Modi that would be responsible for that, but I wonder if you had any update on that in terms of making that crossover safer and providing a separated lane under the overpass there, if that's still in the cards from the province.
Through your worship, thank you, Councillor Back. Yes, great news to report on that one. And that was what I touched on briefly in the upper levels corridor study. And so the Lynn Valley interchange, in addition to the Capilano interchange, have been identified as candidates for near-term improvements. And the scope of the improvements at Lynn Valley Road would essentially mirror the multi-use path that we have on the west side. We would have something similar on the east side, so that there would be a continuous, call it northbound, a bike lane from Boulevard, or Grand Boulevard to Boulevard Crescent, then to Lynn Valley Road, heading up into Lynn Valley. So we're quite hopeful that we can advance that project with the ministry, and then also the city is involved as well. As you can imagine, their jurisdiction is just on the south side of the interchange.
Can you put any time estimate on it, or what does near term look like?
I can't put a year to it. That's all the ministry has said in their report is near term. So I'm hopeful within, I'm hopeful within 5 years, but I can't guarantee a date. They haven't committed to a date for that. I believe they have funding secured for design, but not for construction.
Right. Well, that's great news. Thank you for that. My other question was with regards to the Spirit Trail and our new crossing over Lynn Creek into the Lynn Creek Town Center. Just wondering where that's at.
Yeah, through your worship. Yeah, great question. We're really excited about this piece as well. So we are working closely with the project delivery office. They're leading that project, but this is going to be a great new link for the Spirit Trail. This is one where the tender has been awarded, so we're hoping that the contractor will be breaking ground soon.
Great. And then my other question, I was just wondering about FIBs and when that upgrade eventually happens, what happens to the current FIBs, and what would the temporary sort of situation look like there?
Yeah, great question. So the phasing plan, and I haven't committed it to memory, but if I recall correctly, it was described as sort of an onion approach where you would, I think the concept was to do the peripheral first, and then we'd be also using Oxford as an area for bus layover, and then they would construct the sort of the outside, and then the bus operations would continue on the inside, and then they would flip. So there'd be a couple of stages, and so it'll be a bit tricky to minimize transit service, but that really is the goal, is to keep FIBs operational and to construct as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm.
We are expecting, as I mentioned, the tender in early Q1, and so January, February, and then it's an 18-month schedule for completion.
Right. Great. Those are all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Back. Next speaker I have is Councillor Curran.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation, Steve. Very nice tie. You got all dressed up for us. I just had a question about, and just looking to see this being reported annually in the future. Our OCP targeted a 30% reduction in emissions to 2030. Council then actually increased that to a 45%, so a 50% increase from what our OCP envisioned. We also, in our OCP, which had a lower target for emission reductions, envisioned mode shift from 20 to 35%. In the first decade of our OCP, we have shifted by 2.5%. In the second decade of our OCP, in order to align with our SEEP targets that Council has unanimously endorsed, we have to move a lot faster. And so I'm wondering how staff can report back to us, following up on something Councillor Bond asked about what methodology is used to inform spending and the projects that we allocate. How are we deciding how these projects get us to our agreed upon targets at the scale and pace that we need to go, recognizing it's something we've never done before? Because when I see this, I don't know how we're doing, but we're halfway through and we've only reduced or improved our mode shift by 2.5%. So I wonder if you could speak a bit to that. I guess ultimately it would be good to know if that mode shift is going to increase. I guess that's the first question. Based on our increased SEEP targets, from our original OCP that have increased by 50%, how does staff envision that shifting our mode shift targets to 2030?
Yeah, through your worship, a great question, Councillor Curran. I mean, it's a massive challenge, to what we've set forth, but we are committed to to doing what we can, and that's one of the reasons that we really are pushing for both in terms of investment, but also, the resources that we have within the department to really focus on, active transportation and transit. And, I think, I'm hopeful that rapid transit, we can bring it to the North Shore, and that we can, expand the rapid bus network. And, and I think through, obviously, land use is a huge part of the solution here. And with what we have in the OCP and the OCP action plan, it really, I think, reinforces the vision of these compact and low carbon footprint town centers, and that are well served by transit and active transportation facilities. And we're doing what we can to advance along that path. But I mean, you're absolutely right. It's a huge challenge, and I think electrification of the fleet is part of the solution. I think it's kind of like with InStep, we concluded when we were just looking at traffic congestion in general on the North Shore, we concluded that there's really no one silver bullet. And I think that also applies to this. I think a big part of the solution is land use planning. I think transit. I think what we've seen with the pandemic and working from home, that's taken a lot of cars off the road. So there's other TDM initiatives like what we've done in Lynn Canyon with pay parking, and just I think there's a number of things that need to come together, but we're hopeful that that we can meet those targets that we set for ourselves.
I've got responses from Mr. Stewart and Mr. Ono as well. Mr. Stewart.
Yeah, I'll be really brief, Your Worship. One of the things that Finance identified about 3 years ago is that a lot of these ambitions and goals really, in some cases, transcend terms. And so Rick has been doing a lot of work with staff across the organization to try to develop a much longer plan that allows us to prioritize our capital investments. And so we'll be sharing that with council as part of the budget process. But there's a lot of work that's been done in that, and also with respect to actually measuring progress. So we'll actually have performance indicators, and the goal is to have those performance indicators be available not only to council, but the general community.
Mr. Ono.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. So the indicators, so Councillor Curran's correct, it's a daunting task. And one of the things, because council has been really clear that climate action is a priority, and it's all integrated through, again, a reaffirmation through the OCP action plan that climate action is a priority. So things like the climate action, the climate sustainability office, biodiversity office is being created. We are working closely at a staff level with Carolyn Jackson and with community planning to integrate transportation and land use and identify those indicators that'll be meaningful. So we know, I think, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's somewhere in the realm of 52%, I think, of our GHG emissions are transportation related. And of that, 94% is, or something in that realm, is small vehicle, light vehicle fleet. So like Mr. Carney said, fuel switching is important. But probably more important is things like shortening and reducing the numbers of trips, for especially single occupant vehicle trips. And so each of these things that we're putting in place, whether it's the bike share, whether it's trying to put together a complete network of bike routes, whether it's working with TransLink on advancing things like the beeline from to and from Lynn Valley, rather than trying to expand the road space. All of those things, I think, are going to be bits and pieces. And it's hard to get direct indicators. So we're using proxies. We finally got a bit of a deal, I think, with ICBC, for example, for vehicle ownership in District of North Vancouver postal codes, right? So those are proxies, but still they're things that we'll be using as indicators. So we'll be forecasting and backcasting to see how well we're shifting modes, how well we're reducing vehicle kilometers traveled by private automobile. We're using those kinds of proxies in order to try to report back So more to come is what I can say. We are keeping an eye on that though, because we know that council is being steadfast and consistent in telling us it's a priority. So that's what we're doing, and that's why we're bringing these programs through these workshops to try to advance on each of those areas that you've told us are important. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Mr. Ono. Councilor Kern?
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, I believe staff is committed, and I just wanted to reiterate that we do have to do things we've never done before. This is unprecedented, the scale and speed that we need to move collectively, but there is a lot we can do at a local level. And I guess I wondered what conversations were happening at the engineering level around this shift to decarbonize single occupancy vehicles, because certainly there's no pathway, as I've mentioned before, to a 1.5 degree planet if we transition every ICE vehicle to an EV. And then we still run into the same challenges of sitting in traffic and safety for all mode users. And so, and based on Clean BC's alignment with our policies, nothing's really happening for 2 decades in terms of requirements. So I think that to get to our 2030 EVs, really, they're still quite a small percentage. But can staff kind of report back on how the bigger conversation of the real big transformation that's required in mobility in the 21st century is being discussed? Because frankly, I asked the province at the UBCM what criteria they used to determine if they were going to expand highways, and what climate lens and what social equity lens and what human health lenses were used. And the answers were very underwhelming and concerning, frankly, as we haven't really mentioned tonight about human health, but I mean, really, it's like everyone's mental health and physical health, and the need for people to have accessible mobility options that don't necessarily need to be privately owned vehicles in the future. So how is that conversation going? Because I get very nervous when I hear about switching to EVs, because that's not a solution.
Through your worship, a great question, Councillor Curran. There's a lot of discussion, within the industry, just on this topic. It's I would say first and foremost, really, for a lot of my colleagues in other municipalities, and in the industry and consulting and so on. But I think, the pandemic was one. A shift that really created a big change in terms of travel patterns. And, I think that, I don't want to say that that's the solution, but I think that something fairly dramatic is needed to change behaviors. And it's probably, it probably involves, concepts such as mobility pricing and, severely restricting limiting, perhaps is a better term, an abundance of free parking. And there's a whole different way, number of ways in which that could be implemented. I mean, I do know that that's, a lot of that, particularly around the mobility pricing, is really a provincial decision. But I think pay parking is one way that we can try and encourage that mode shift. But I think there needs to be competitive and reliable and frequent alternatives to single car use. And I think really investing heavily in transit, in rapid transit, and a whole network of rapid transit, but then also a supporting network of rapid bus and then local bus service and community shuttles. And but again, coming back to the concept of the land use planning, I think is super, super important. I mean, I don't think that can be understated how important land use planning is. So I think there's a number of mechanisms that will help us get there. It's probably not one alone is going to do it, but I think a number of things in acting together will help us achieve those targets.
Thank you.
Mr. Ono, you had a response as well?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. And just very briefly, so the answer, Your Worship, through you to Councillor Curran, is yes, that conversation goes on, and it's not just about electrifying vehicles. It's between TransLink and Metro Vancouver. It's about that idea of providing transit and alternatives such as bicycles and such as pedestrian facilities in compact, complete communities where services are within active transportation type modes, and jobs are within those within reach of those modes. It's all about that, and that's where I really believe, Your Worship, that the district's community plan of a network of centers, it's on the right track, and we just have to build it out and keep on making it possible to shift so that people can get to and from their services and access to goods and jobs in a more sustainable way, Your Worship. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been supportive of expanding our cycling network in the community, although I do think most of the benefit is going to be recreational. It's not going to be moving people into commuter services. Just last month, as an example, was the rainiest November in the history of Novembers, and we have our hills, and so in that month, everybody opts to not ride their bicycle, and now they're expecting that we're going to have the transit services available to handle that extra capacity. Well, you go through the summer months and everybody shifts into other modes, which is great for recreational purposes anyway, but then you will not have the capacity available to you on the snow day, on the heavy rain day, because it requires a fare box fee throughout the entire year in order to be able to make that space available. And so that's one of the challenges, is that the more people you move, particularly out of buses into bikes, the more you erode the ability of the transit and bus service to be able to accommodate them in the event of a bad weather day. And so there's always going to be a tension there between those two aspects. I did want to make two just quick comments. Lynmouth Avenue, I think, has a timing challenge near the Winter Club there. I think it goes far too frequently, blocking Keith. And so what's happening is traffic coming down from Lynn Valley is hitting the two highway spots, Keith, Lynmouth, and they're hitting them all. And so where we had told the community that there was actually going to be a 14-second or some minor improvement for people moving through this corridor, that's all gone because of the light rotation. And Lynmouth being the most egregious of all. The other ones at least have a justification for it. They have a time and space problem. There's already so much traffic moving through in the other rotations, but Lynmouth will stop every 35, 45 seconds to let one car out. And it blocks all of Keith Road, 4 lanes wide of traffic that it blocks in order to be able to let one person out. And so I think that one really needs to be adjusted. Delineators would assist with some of the queue jumping and stuff that is going on, both at the approaches to the bridge, both approaches. I think that the Main Street on-ramp onto Highway 1 should have some delineators for a little bit of time. Having trucks move from what's effectively the bridge center lane over to the right lane immediately on upon the traffic joining from Main Street is causing Main Street to grind to a halt. That heavy traffic should clear a little bit, give people a chance to match speed, find a spot to be able to scramble and switch. It's all happening too fast and too short of a distance because the trucks just are told to get into the right lane and they don't want to be on the hill. But the problem is, if you don't let the traffic find a good scramble alignment, you're just going to end up with conflict in that spot. And so I think some delineators to extend that a little bit further up the hill might actually make that run a little bit smoother. But I'm not a traffic engineer per se, but I think it might be a tool that you could try to help address it. The broader question that I wanted to comment on is something that we don't capture in a lot of our statistics. And so people want mode shift, they want more efficient vehicles and all these, fantastic, these are great. But at the end of the day, Every time you stop a truck, you waste so much energy, and a phenomenal amount of energy. You bring a 25,000 kilogram truck to a full dead stop, the amount of energy that you have to use to get that thing back up to speed again, dozens of cars. And so, you know, we have to look at our infrastructure in a way that says that we're going to do our best to not stop particularly heavy traffic. We're going to keep it going, because you want to see savings in loss and inefficiency. That's the big issue. This topic is huge. Obviously, it's an area of fantastic interest for our council. I want to note it is now an hour and 15 minutes into the workshop, and we're on the introduction. And so every member of council has had an opportunity to speak. Mr. Carney, Mr. Owen, and Mr. Stewart have all given great responses so far. I really want to encourage everybody to help us move on to the next items, that the meat of the workshop. I see, Councillor Bond's hand is up. Councillor Bond, your comments with that in mind, please.
Well, I'll put this thought in staff's mind, and it's probably similar to comments every year that for the past 6 or 7 years that we've had this annual transportation workshop, and it's following up on the discussion on Councillor Kern's comments. And I think what would be really useful, looking forward to know that we're on the right path to meet those necessary climate emission reduction targets, it is to work backwards. And because right now, we have been increasing the amount of investment we've been putting in to mode shift and to safer modes around the district. But when I look at places like the city of Vancouver, who have seen a rather dramatic mode shift, specifically in their downtown, in the Main Street area, in Kitsilano, it took about 10 years. It took a decade before those first investments in the separated bike lanes downtown really started to show. Once and they're still investing heavily in that. And so I think given the timeline for us to meet these emission reductions, I'd really like to see, starting out in 2030 and even 2050, and working backwards to see what types of infrastructure and what types of changes do we need to make today, and how much do those cost, and where might they be? Because I think, similar to Councillor Curran, I see us doing a lot more than we have in the past, but I don't see it as being transformational. And to have some assurance that we are on a path to where we've said we need to be, where council has endorsed the SEEP and our OCP action plan, we really need to backcast those targets and to say, here are the projects, here are the initiatives, here are the policies that we need in place on these dates if we are going to meet those goals as a committee. So I'll leave that as a bug in staff's ear, but that would be something that would give me a lot more comfort. And when we do get the annual update, to know that we are on that path, and we are moving there at the speed necessary.
Thank you very much. I would suggest that we move on to item 1. Is that Mr. Ono? Are you going to be introducing the Slow Street Initiative?
Your Worship, in the interest of saving time, I'll just ask Mr. Brandon to start his presentation, if that's okay.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak this evening. My name is Brendan James, and I work in the transportation planning team as a TDM coordinator. I joined the district in May of this year after serving 5 years at Metro Vancouver Regional District, coordinating electric vehicle outreach programs for the Air Quality and Climate Change Division. I'm going to ask Mr. Carney just to advance my slides, if that's okay. So next slide, Steve. Thank you. Awesome, thanks. So during this evening's presentation, I'm going to provide an introduction to Vision Zero, give you an overview of the district safety first approach. I'm going to provide some insight into the impacts of vehicle speed. Then I will explain our proposed slow streets initiative and present the next steps. And finally, I will open up to discussions and some questions. I have about 13 slides. It's going to take about 10 to 15 minutes. The transportation team will be on hand to address any questions you have about the presentation. So let us begin. Many of you may be familiar with the term Vision Zero, and I'd like to explain this concept to you, and later you'll see how it relates to our Slow Streets initiative. The Vision Zero approach to road safety is to eliminate fatalities and serious injuries in our transportation system, because no loss of life is acceptable. Vision Zero starts with an ethical belief that everyone has the right to move safely in their communities, and the system designers, us, and the policymakers share their responsibility to ensure safe travel systems. The Vision Zero approach is based on the principle that people make mistakes, and the transportation system needs to be designed and operated in a way that caters to human error in order to eliminate fatalities and serious injuries. 15 cities across Canada have adopted Vision Zero commitments or included elements of their Vision Zero programs, just like the district. Next slide, Steve. This graphic, courtesy of the British Columbia Active Transportation Design Guide, clearly illustrates the relationship between motor vehicle speed and pedestrian fatality risk in a collision. Simply put, lowering speeds significantly impacts the survival rate of pedestrians in a collision. To put this issue into context, we researched district-specific ICBC data on collisions involving pedestrians and cyclists. During the period from 2016 to 2020, there were approximately 142 incidents involving pedestrians, 119 of which resulted in an injury. During the same period, there were approximately 169 vehicle incidents involving cyclists, 146 of which resulted in an injury. Next slide, please. Although the district does not have a formal Vision Zero program at this time, our staff work to minimize the risks to people walking, rolling, and driving through careful planning and design of our transportation network. Active transportation projects such as improvements along West 15th Street and East 29th Street also help improve safety of the traveling public. Speed reduction in key areas is another measure that supports the safety of all road users. Next slide, please. So let's move forward to our proposed Slow Streets initiative. This initiative is intended to inform the district's approach to speed limits in residential areas and on local streets. Speed reduction measures would be implemented on local roads in 2 separate areas for a duration of 1 year. The plan is to have one area that will be designated a 30km/h speed limit and another area which will be a 40km/h speed limit. A third area will be designated as a control area with similar characteristics to the test areas, but no changes to the posted speed limit. These speed limits will only apply to roads classified as local roads. Arterial and collector roads will remain at their existing speed limits. It is essential that this project is designed in a way that allows for comprehensive evaluation. This data-driven approach is incorporated into all phases of the project. Next slide, please. Staff estimate the duration of this project could be spread over 3 years. The project could be tackled in 3 phases. Phase 1, planning, would be conducted in 2022, with the recommendations to be brought forward to council at the end of that year. Contingent on council and budgetary approval, phase 2 would only begin after that, with 6 months of public engagement followed by the implementation phase. Monitoring and maintenance of the control areas will happen for a period of 1 year, and then phase 3 would finish the project off with data analysis and reporting. Next slide, please. So let me just delve into phase 1 of this initiative in a little bit more detail. Staff would undertake project planning, which may include, but not limited to, activities such as budgeting, site selection, internal stakeholder engagement, and baseline data collection. At the end of this phase, staff would deliver a monitoring and evaluation plan, but have more accurate estimates of staffing and consultant resources, and also provide a final project scope and budget. This planning phase will allow staff to gather sufficient information to make recommendations for phase 2. These recommendations will be presented to Council at the 2022 Fall Transportation Workshop. Next slide, please. Before we move on to the discussion, here are some further implications for Council to consider. Staffing. At present, this work is not included in the 2022 and beyond transportation work plan. Work resources will have to be reallocated to this project if Council chooses to move forward with the initiative. This initiative will require collaboration with a number of other district departments, including communications, streets, and finance. Enforcement. The district will have to collaborate with RCMP to perform enforcement in the study areas during the project implementation phase. And finally, funding and signage. Future operational impacts could be significant if this initiative is ultimately adopted district-wide. This is a future or forward-looking statement. A large amount of regulatory signage will be necessary to designated slower speed limits than 50 kilometers an hour than the 50 kilometer an hour local street default. Next slide, please. So moving forward, I present Council with two different options. One, that the committee provide direction to advance the Slow Streets initiative, specifically with phase 1 planning to be conducted in 2022, and then report on the findings, or for 2, that no further action is taken at this time. All right, and I'm just going to open it up for a discussion and questions. Thanks very much.
Yeah, just a couple of questions first here. Out of the 119 injuries that you have reported in the report here, how many of those took place on local roads?
I will have to acquire that data, sir, and get back to you. I don't have that offhand with me at this point, but I can certainly get that for Council and report back.
Okay. How many people died in a car accident in the district last year, and how many of those deaths were on local roads?
Through your worship, again, sir, I will have to get that data and report back to Council on findings, and I'll be prepared to do that.
So the reason why I'm asking the questions is twofold. One, if you don't have a benchmark, it doesn't matter what you pilot, you're not going to be able to compare it and see whether or not it's actually making any measurable difference. The other piece being that the generic risk in Canada of being killed in a car accident a given year is rated as 1 in 10 to the -6, about a chance of 1 in 100,000 people dying in a car accident in any given year. District of North Vancouver is about 90,000 people, so it'd be about 1 person dying in a car accident in a given year. And what I'm wondering is, are we already higher than the national average? Are we lower than the national average? What benchmark are we setting in order to be able to determine success of this? Because I suspect what you're going to end up with is that there's an extremely low number of fatalities occurring on local roads. However, I do recognize that they would have an extremely high societal cost. And in a risk sense, that means that the community would be very impacted by them, because they might be a kid near an elementary school. It might be something more local like that. But I think the risk of it actually occurring is very low in the district. And so when we're formulating a pilot where you would have to be able to judge the performance of the pilot, that's all part of this program. I don't know how you even start without knowing the background and where you're at. One of the challenges we have with the enforcement piece, which was the second bullet on your thing, is we don't direct the RCMP in terms of their application of their resources. They are independently managed in that regard. We can support them with the acquisition of additional officers. We can support them with volunteer teams like Speed Watch, Crime Watch, in order to be able to more effectively manage enforcement in particular areas. But we don't say, all right, you're going to park a car at that local road in particular, because the volumes on local roads are so low, it's not typically a good use of a full member RCMP officer to sit at that location. All the while, we have major traffic infractions on major roads at a very high frequency. You know, I know Bev Parslow is here in person, and I'm sure he's going to make some comments at the tail end, some of which will probably differ from me, but one that he's definitely going to have to agree with is that the video he took at Highlands Road showed that on a major road, people are blowing through the stop sign constantly, and we can't seem to get the RCMP to enforce Highlands, Delbrook, Mount Royal. And yet, here we are saying that we're going to run a pilot and we're going to stick RCMP officers effectively in cul-de-sacs at local roads in order to be able to do it. I don't understand how that can possibly happen amongst the priorities we have and the risk that we have on major roads right now. I don't know if you have a response to that. Go for it.
Through your worship, thank you. That, very valuable statement. I think that all of these aspects we're going to be exploring in phase one. Really, in essence, phase one of this pilot is a fact-finding mission to find out if this initiative suits the district and will work for us, and be able to acquire the data that we're looking for to support this long term. And bringing that forward to council to pursue if they feel that this is a priority. So next year, we really have earmarked as a fact-finding mission to see if we want to get into the weeds with this project going forward long term. Thank you.
Mr. Ono, you have a response?
Yes, Your Worship, just to reiterate, just to emphasize or amplify what Brendan just said. We have a concern about, just as you mentioned, about resourcing and allocation of resources. What I'm truly concerned about is that if something like this were to gain traction, and it were to expand across the district to all of the local streets network in the district, it would really consume a lot of resources away from all of those initiatives that Your Worship just mentioned as being important priorities on our collector and arterial roads, as well as the priority bike routes. So it really is a choice, and that's where we know that some members of council are interested in this initiative. And we're just seeking direction on where we place our resources. And so we're proposing it in an incremental way. The first year would be to thoroughly explore it and then be able to report back so that you can make a fully informed decision about whether we truly embark on this in 2023 going forward. Thank you, Your Worship.
Well, and I still just, in the last few seconds I have here, I did just want to say that I still think we have to prioritize our resources to where our accidents are. ICBC's crash data is the best way for us to be applying our resources. I also am curious about what effect this would have on the enhanced visibility and awareness that we use in school zones. If the entire area became 30 kilometers an hour, it wouldn't have the effect of saying this is a special spot, please pay special attention. So that and the fact that there's 1,000 signs, and I'd really prefer to go on a sign diet rather than adding 1,000 additional signs to the District of North Vancouver, I have some concerns about the program. Next speaker is Councillor Bond.
Yeah, those are I'm trying. What you said made me think a little bit, Mayor Little, and so when I taking your comments into consideration, we started off with the vision, the overview of Vision Zero, and as staff mentioned in their presentation, slow streets on local roads is one component of a Vision Zero program. But Vision Zero would also apply to major roads. It would also apply to collectors. So I remember, and staff can correct me or inform me, I remember a couple years ago, staff went through a process of changing and rejigging the classification system for roads in the district. I remember we went through a process, and that was I can't remember, a council approved a new classification system of collectors major arterials and local roads. So I'm wondering, do we need to relook at how roads are classified in the district? And also on our major arterials or our minor arterials or our collector roads, Delbrook comes to mind because that's one that's a constant pain in that neighborhood. Are we also going to be applying a Vision Zero approach? I know on Delbrook, some of our arterial roads and our collector roads need a significant engineering change in order for anything to actually change in terms of driver behavior. We're not going to change people speeding 70 or 80 kilometers an hour down Delbrook when it's built like a 2-lane highway, but it's only 1 lane. So we need a significant engineering change on many of our arterial roads because they were built for back in earlier days in the district when a significant amount of additional subdivisions, single family subdivisions were planned, and they were built for a capacity that far exceeds what it actually is today. And so, taking that Vision Zero approach, I think we should be looking holistically at all of our road corridors. I remember, was it last year's transportation workshop or the transportation workshop before, asked whether we were doing corridor plans for all these major corridors. We should sit down and look at Delbrook and say, this is what Delbrook looks like today, and in order to reduce speeding, to make it safe for people walking, for kids walking to school, for all the crossings that are on there, this is what the road needs to look like. And we should be doing that methodically across the district, addressing, as Mayor Little said, the highest areas of highest concern and highest risks first, but moving through the entire district, because we need to, if we are looking for a Vision Zero approach, and assuming that those hundreds of injuries, thankfully not so many fatalities, but even those hundreds of injuries have a societal impact for people's health and a cost, then we really need to look at doing this in a holistic way. Those are comments. The only other question I would have is, we have a 3-year study planned, but there's so much evidence from around the world that slower speeds on streets is just like a no-brainer in terms if you want to reduce injuries and deaths. So why do we need 3 years of study to prove something that's already been proven?
Through your worship, thank you, Councillor Bond. It's an excellent question, and it's actually a question I thought of myself. What are the what data could we use globally and across the country to be able to support our argument within year 1 of the study? And I think amalgamating all of that and getting other examples locally, like from the city of Surrey and the district of Saanich and the city of Vancouver, and having long-term results that we can apply to our local community is just part of that 1 year of investigation that we are proposing for next year. But I think also having some DMV specific results in specific key areas where we are getting a lot of feedback from residents, concerned parents around neighborhoods where kids are walking to school and they feel vulnerable, or other road users, and getting some good data from this project in those areas could be applicable, and visibly would be a great means of acquiring that as well and engaging with our community.
Thanks. And Mayor Little, I know I'm at my 4 minutes, so my first time. I have one final comment just to wrap up that thought. I think we also need a qualitative assessment. We can track the numbers, but the feeling as a parent walking down the street and having to be constantly vigilant every second where you're walking, so that of your child and your child's behavior and your behavior, so that they don't get killed by a vehicle, whether it's traveling 40 or 50 or 60 kilometers an hour, is a lot of load on a lot of people. And so I think there's a qualitative health and mental health aspect here too that won't show up in the numbers necessarily.
Okay. Mr. Stewart, did you have a response? And then Mr. Ono?
Well, your worship, this is the conundrum that council faces, which is safety does mean slower travel speeds. Travel speeds that are slower means inconvenience to a lot of people that are traveling. And that's the balance that you're going to have to strike in the district, because irrespective of how we go about doing a pilot and getting evidence for you, there are going to be people, for example, if we start to reduce speed limits on some streets, that are going to be in opposition. And so that's, I mean, I'm sorry to say it, we can give you all the evidence, the information you can, but at the end of the day, it's going to be a political decision.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ono.
Thank you, Worship. I was going to actually reply along the same lines regarding the qualitative assessment. So they're part of that year of study or planning involves a communication outreach plan to get that sense of how much support when we select a neighborhood. Because as Mr. Stewart said, anytime you talk about transportation, it always seems like we get a half a dozen different opinions. And it tends to be somewhat polarizing, and it actually it really helps that council has been steadfast in so many ways, because when staff are confronted with all these conflicting opinions out there in the public, it really helps to know clearly where council stands and what council's priority is. The other thing that I would like to say is the district does have a road safety plan, and the district does have a pedestrian master plan. They are meant to be data driven. So things like the crash stats, data for vehicle speeds, volumes, all of that went into their components of the district's strategic transportation plan that some members of council would have seen. I think the last time you would have seen the whole thing would have been about 2012 or 2014, and then it was revisited, as Councillor Bond mentioned, when we came back to talk about road classification. So a lot of those factors actually go into trying to prioritize the different kinds of measures that we put onto our streets and the prescriptions that we put onto local street versus a collector street versus an arterial road, and whether or not it's on a route to school or not. So all of that is looked at holistically in order to try to prioritize all of these measures that we're trying to apply in order to improve the livability of our district. Thank you, Your Worship.
Mr. Ono. Next speaker I have is Councillor Curran.
Thank you. I'm one of the councillors that Mr. Ono keeps referring to that has been championing Vision Zero and Slow Streets initiatives in our community. I sort of oftentimes think of how I would explain the systems that we have now to a child, and sometimes I do take that opportunity. And so looking forward, if we said we knew that cars were damaging the health of the environment upon which we rely on, and they're damaging people's lives, wouldn't we change that? We're public policymakers. And so to me, this is something that the ask of staff could have been, do you feel like it's important as a public policymaker to do everything you can to keep as many people safe in your community? And the answer would be, of course, yes. And so is that going to be seemingly inconvenient for some people? Perhaps, but that's not what good public policy is. It's about improving people's lives. And so I think, building on what Councillor Bond was talking about, it's not just whether or not someone dies tragically in our community. And I would say that across the North Shore, there have been tragic deaths, and there doesn't have to be a death. It's also the fear that people have, and the amount of people that don't participate in active transportation because we live in a car-addicted, car-dominated system. And we, as policymakers, have the ability to change those systems through good policy. And so this is a policy that that is important. I think it's something that we're going to look back on and say, yeah, we did that. Do we want the province to take the initiative? And Mayor Little, to your point of thousands of signs, absolutely. There is a rural-urban divide. Like I've championed this issue at the provincial level, and there is a rural-urban divide. There doesn't seem to be any movement on their part, and sometimes I think then we do have to take the lead. And I do believe there is evidence and data to support. I don't know what else we need to know that you go from a 15% to 15% at 50 kilometers up to 90% at 30 kilometers. Like, we have the data, we have the evidence. We're behind other municipalities. We'd be ahead of some municipalities. And I understand that everything is about choices. But this to me is a bit of a philosophical shift of whose priority, whose safety are we prioritizing in our community? And I think that it aligns with a lot of other policies that we've set forward. And I also agree with the points. I think we are in a time of ands, and the collector and arterial roads are certainly dangerous in our community. As you most know, I live in Deep Cove, and there's no safe way on a bike out of our community. Either you're going on the Parkway or Dollarton, and they're very fast roads without protected cycling infrastructure. So anyway, I support this, and I think it's that important.
Thank you, Councillor Curran. The next speaker is Councillor Back.
Thank you, Mayor Little. Thank you very much to staff for bringing this idea forward. I was also one of the councillors who've had some conversations. I know Councillor Curran and I have talked, and I've talked to some councillors in other municipalities across the North Shore about making our streets safer. And I agree with all the comments that have been said so far. I think, it is a feeling to a certain degree. And I know my own perspective has changed a lot in the last couple of years, having now 2 little kids and having made a mode shift to riding a lot of the time, and often with those kids. It doesn't feel very safe a lot of the time in a lot of areas. And I think, this is one way that we can, kind of along the lines of what Councillor Curran said, send a bit of a message to sort of change the tone around how people are using our streets. I think we've seen throughout the pandemic that people are using our local roads differently. I know my own street, there's never been more kids playing out in the street on nice days. And when we get traffic that's moving fast down those local roads, it's quite jarring. And I'm seeing that more and more in various parts of our community, and we're certainly hearing from members of the community with these kinds of issues that are happening. Like Councillor Bond said, I'm interested in the holistic approach. I know we've done lots of great work around safe routes to schools, and I would like to see an initiative like this tie into that as well. I know just last week we heard from a parent, I believe it was Canyon Heights Elementary, where there's some real issues there in front of that school. And so I think this is where we can tie in something like a slow streets initiative to some of those school zones. In terms of the inconvenience for drivers, I think it's something that you have to experience. I follow on Twitter the Mayor of Guelph, Ontario, and I recommend you check out some of his videos. But he recently did a video on taking a route in his car at the speed limit, and then again at 30K, and the difference was just a couple of minutes. But you can see the impact, and when you look at those survival rates that Councillor Curran mentioned, it's very, very different between 30K and 50K. So at this point, I'm very supportive of the first stage of this, which would be the planning. And I definitely hear what the mayor is saying when it's, you have to know how you're going to measure success in a pilot project. So I think that does have to be clearly defined. So I encourage staff to take the time to really look at that and look at how this could tie into all of our other initiatives that are going to make our streets safer and slow things down, because I think the time has come. And so really pleased to see this come forward, and I'm very supportive of the recommendation that's in the report.
Thank you, Councillor Back. Councillor Murray.
Well, I'm
trying to figure out how a sign is going to slow people down if we don't have a way of enforcing that speed. You know, I'm all for trying to slow cars down. I think what's changed over the years is, and at Delbrook, I mean, I've talked a lot about Delbrook with the local neighborhood, and I think what's changed is the drive of the cars. They drive differently. You know, nice luxury cars drive differently than a Datsun or a Honda. Very differently. Teslas drive very differently. They're not really a car. They're more like a rocket ship. And they take little acceleration to go very fast. Cars that are lower to the ground drive differently. So it's human behavior, but it's also the type of car that is changing within the community. The parkway is 60 kilometers. That's the speed on that road. And no one drives 60 on the parkway. The parkway is, you know, the average speed is 80 on the parkway. So I wish it was as simple as creating new policy and putting a sign up, and then all our problems will go away. But I just don't. I think we're giving sort of a false sense of security. I think there should be in school zones. I think there should be enforcement, and I think there should be 30. And I think that enforcement should be on a regular basis. I worked, you know, extensively on changing behavior on Carnation in front of the elementary school that I put 3 kids through. And it was one of the biggest challenges I ever faced. And I had lots of parents that were really interested in becoming part of the solution. And then their kids graduate and they go on, and then there's another group that comes in and you kind of start all over again. And it was a very challenging process, because some people want to, you know, do everything they can to slow traffic down and behavior. We had cars parking on crosswalks, on sidewalks, cars stopping in the middle of the road and opening up their automatic doors for their kids to jump in their vans. Cars double parking, getting out of the car with it running to get their kids. I mean, it's, you know, in Canyon Heights, I think the presentation last week, they showed some pictures of what's going on there. And it's, you know, I was sitting there going, oh, I've seen that all before. And what changed was engineering the road. So we did things like using delineators to run from sidewalks to where you could park, because yellow just doesn't, you know, I don't think there's, you know, people don't pay attention to yellow curbs anymore. But delineators, you can't park in front of them. You're in the middle of the road. It pushes you out. So that solved that problem. Raised crosswalks solved the problem. Crossing guards solved the problem. Having, you know, the kids had a program. So I think engineering works. You know, yes, do we have lots of roadways with no sidewalk? Yes. I mean, you know, the cost of us being able to put the sidewalks in, we've talked about this. It's just, you know, we could never do it. If we're worried about, you know, paying for some signs. But you know, I don't know if putting 30 on a sign is somehow going to make it safer unless we're able to enforce all those areas. And how can we enforce all those areas? We can barely enforce what we've got now. And, you know, there's areas such as Delbrook. Delbrook is such a problem because it is such a wide road. Do we run a median down the center of the road? Do we put more curb bulges out? Do we put, you know, raised crosswalks everywhere to slow it down? You know, maybe that's something that we need to do. So,
Counselor?
Well, So I think there has to be a bit of a hybrid here. I don't know why this is going to take 3 years to study, implement. The costs seem a little bit extreme. Couldn't we just bag the signs or put stickers on them for the pilot? Like, I think there needs to be a little bit more work. I'm not saying that I'm not supportive of lowering speed limits on side streets, but I think that there's a lot of arterials that we have a lot of problems with too.
Councillor Murray, I have to give other people a chance to speak in the workshop as well.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't think I had gone. Everybody else seemed to speak quite a long time. I don't see a clock. I understand we have one. It's hard to keep track, Mayor Little, so.
Yeah, it's cleared. So Councillor Forbes, Mr. James, you have a response?
Through your worship, I just wanted to thank Councillor Murray for her comments. Definitely enforcement is something that we would want to quantify during the first year of or phase 1 of the project, and also explore those other options in terms of what engineering could we be doing to help get the results that we are looking for from this pilot, and could we also compress the timeline by using initiatives to be able to get us the results in a shorter time frame. But thank you very much for your comments. They're greatly appreciated.
Mayor Little, could we just ask, considering it's 9 o'clock right now, and obviously these issues are huge issues. I wish we had started at 5. Now, are we going to begin, after we finish this, a discussion on cycling at 9 at night?
That will be up to the council, and I was going to create an opportunity once we finish this topic to just have a brief discussion about that. Next speaker I have is Councillor Forbes.
Thank you. Just to add to that, I was told that 29th Street was going to be discussed tonight too, and I didn't see it on the agenda, so I'm not sure where it's coming in. Anyway, that's something that has to be discussed as well, and was supposed to be discussed under the transportation review. Just a couple of things, well, no, quite a few things I could actually say, but I think that I'm concerned about 2 things in the planning, because what happens when we're planning for these things is we also, we make a plan, then it costs us money, we implement it, and then we study if it's right. Somehow that's a little bit backwards to me, because if it's not right, then we've just spent money we don't need to spend. And if we're going to put in bike lanes at a cost of 1.5 million, like on 29th Street, we're already putting a lot of our budget into this active transportation plan. The survival rates that Councillor Curran mentions, they don't really apply. If you listen to the statistics that Mayor Little said, we're not a Toronto. The little district of North Vancouver isn't Metro Vancouver. So those statistics, survival rates don't apply to the DNV. And then again, like everything else, the DNV's geography has to be considered a unique area. So we can't really necessarily compare with Surrey, which is mainly flat. The transportation plan of 2012, I was hoping it was going to get reviewed. Because I think there's a lot of things in 2012 that have changed drastically to 2021. And so some of that transportation plan, I believe staff feels that they're following through on that transportation plan. And I think there's some things in there that are need to be changed. I agree with Councillor or Mayor Little that we need a baseline too before we start measuring these things. And we need a really good hard look at resources. We cannot be laying out $1.5 million on every bike lane we want, and then laying out for all of these things. And I do think too much signage is bad. It gets too busy and people don't pay attention. And I would agree with Councillor Murray on this. If we can't stop infractions now, and we don't have enough police to enforce our infractions now, how the hell are we going to do this for the whole district? It just doesn't make sense to me. And Kirkstone, where I live, is a perfect example of this stupidity in one way. We had a survey done and a study done, and a consultant came out with the results, and he gave the information he wanted to correct the problem on Kirkstone of speeding. And it's 1 kilometer long. It has 1 crosswalk on it. And we just, a couple of years ago, got the second light on it. That's 1 kilometer long S-turn up and down street. And I begged the district for 10 years practically to enforce that study and to do something about Kirkstone. It's a residential neighborhood, but it's the rat running street from Capilano all the way to Lynn Valley, to run down Kirkstone and go to Mountain Highway and down to the highway. So we had a study, we had a recommendation, and the district refused to put it in. So I'm really angry because I argued for many, many years, and finally the district put in a 30K across from Kirkstone Park. It should have been there at the very beginning to protect children then. I don't think the community's ready to go this far, and I think there's a limit to what you can more or less force on people. There may be a majority of this council that likes these ideas, and I'm not saying I don't like them either, but I'm saying the pace that some people want to do, I don't think the community's going to accept it. Thank you.
Councillor Forbes. Councillor Henson, your comments.
Yeah, thank you very much, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. James, for your presentation and your report. I'd also like to thank all of the prior speakers for the ideas that they've put forward. I've listened with great interest. I hope that we can hear from the public before the evening is complete. I see Bev Parslow in the gallery, a person that's very passionate on the issue of speed in our municipality and very experienced. And I do hope before the evening is done that Mr. Parslow has, and others, if there are others who want to make public input, have a chance to do so. Let me say that I support Vision Zero, and specifically I support this initiative. I appreciate the concerns that are raised with respect to enforcement and whether the RCMP have the capacity to enforce. And I also appreciate that we're calling for a diversion of staff resources and an imposition of demand in general. However, I believe this is a cause that's worth those resources, and I believe we should be taking this step at this time. When we talk about the harms caused by motor vehicles, motor vehicle accidents, motor vehicle pedestrian accidents, motor vehicle cycling accidents, it's not just death, of course. For 36 and a half years, I've represented people that are injured in accidents. It's been my career. I've seen firsthand the consequences of vehicular damage that is inflicted in our culture. And much like other speakers that have come before me, I've marveled that our society has made the calculated decision to tolerate this level of injury and mayhem as part of our transportation system. I've also come face to face with death on the roadways, family members that have lost loved ones, lost children. That's a much rarer circumstance and is becoming increasingly rare with changes in medicine and changes in cars. However, the fact remains that more typically, a consequence of accident is injury and great hardship for many. And also, speed affects the livability of neighborhoods. I believe our neighborhoods will be more livable if our side streets, if the neighborhoods generally the cars go slower, and if we develop a societal norm of slower driving. I'm also aware of the issue of speed and perception, and the fact that the human eye is very poor at gauging the speed of an object which is coming at it directly, which accounts for so many accidents. And slower speeds help to correct that challenge that human beings have with speed and perception of oncoming objects. So I support this initiative. I'd like us to commence with the planning stage as was set out in the report. I look forward to more comprehensive plan and more comprehensive budgetary details, but I believe that we should get started with this initiative, which I believe is the path forward for speed and cars and urban areas generally in the big picture. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Quick comments, Councillor Back, Councillor Kern, Councillor Back.
My comment is quick, Your Worship. When we were talking about enforcement, I know I've had conversations in the past with Superintendent Bayani, and it occurred to me that we haven't had a presentation to council from our new superintendent, and I'm just wondering if that opportunity will be created in the new year.
We can definitely arrange for that. We've just had our first police committee meeting with the new OIC, and I've already been involved with the Safe Streets group and the North Shore Safety Council with the OIC in and around school zones. It's definitely an area we've set out as a priority, and I'll make sure that we have a council presentation on the matter.
That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Curran.
Thank you. I just wondered if staff could clarify that slide. There seemed to be some confusion. I believe the data is showing what the human body can withstand at various speeds. It doesn't really have anything to do with where you are. It has to do with what the impact is of a car hitting a person at a certain speed. Can staff just clarify that slide, please?
Mr. Carney.
Yes, through your worship. Thank you, Councillor Curran. Yes, if I'm thinking of the correct slide, what it shows is that the x-axis is speed and the y-axis is the percentage risk of pedestrian death. And at 30 kilometers an hour, it's 10%, and at 50 kilometers an hour, it's 85%.
Thank you for clarifying.
My pleasure.
Yeah, it does put some questions on some of the other stats though then, because if you have 119 injuries and you have a ratio of 15% should have been fatalities then. And so I guess some of the other stats don't jive with that. And maybe it's because they're mixing the occupants of cars' risks versus the pedestrians' risk in an accident. I don't know, but it doesn't seem to all line up. Anyway, Councillor Forbes, your comment?
Yeah, just a couple of quick statements. I'm all for safety. I took petitions around my neighborhood 2 or 3 times to get the safety on Kirkstone, and it took a long, long time to get it. And it's still not safe. And when we finally got the 30K speed limit in on Kirkstone across from the park, coming into entering the park, the first couple of weeks, I stopped and talked to the RCMP, and they said that we've paid for the next 10 years of the police ball with the amount of tickets they were giving out. So the signs don't mean anything really to the people who really want to speed. It's enforcement that will stop them. And we do have RCMP once in a while on Kirkstone, not as often, and people are right back to their old behavior. So I'm all for safety and for slowing down. But I think that we need to look not just so hard at one thing, but we need to look at all of our chances to do that. And for me, that means, you know, roundabouts, bump outs. The recommendation from the consultants was raised crosswalks and more of them on Kirkstone. So there's a lot of other type of infrastructure that you can do to achieve slowing people down. So I would like to look at all of that. And then I'd like to get Kirkstone reclassified. It goes through a major residential area, and we are the Rat Run Road, and I would like to get our speed changed down to 30 all the way along Kirkstone. We have a lot of kids at the park, and we have a lot of older people. We have a rest home at the end of the street. So there are people that go out with their walkers, and they're trying to get from one side of Kirkstone to the other, and I'm amazed that there hasn't been some of them killed. So I'm all for slowing down. I just want us to use all of our measures to do it. That's all. Thank you.
Councillor Forbes, Mr. Stewart, your response?
Your worship, just a quick comment. In our last police committee meeting, the superintendent did indicate that he's looking at restructuring and repurposing traffic resources to improve that, not only around schools, but generally in municipalities. So we will arrange to have him come and present to council early in the new year, and he can itemize those changes that he's making, that he's shared with the police committee.
Thank you. Council, what I'm inclined to do at this time is create a space for public input into this matter, and then defer the second matter to another night. I think it's going to also take a whole evening of feedback. Just wondering if anyone has any strong opposition to taking that approach, just so I can get some public input now at this already after 9 o'clock. Councillor Forbes, did you have a comment on that?
No, I was just going to say, if you're going to have another meeting on transportation, could we add 29th to that meeting, please?
I'm sure we can get an update. There was a report just sent around to council about the volumes on 29th. I'm sure we can get an update of something.
No, I mean, I've been talking to a lot of people on 29th, and I mentioned it to you, and you said you thought we could discuss it. And I mentioned it to Mr. Stewart, and he also thought we could discuss it. So I'd really like it added to the transportation. It is the annual transportation review, and we promised the residents of 29th that we'd come back and review it after a year. So I think we owe it to them.
Okay. Mr. Stewart?
Your worship, what I indicated to Councillor Forbes is part of the overview that council would have the opportunity to identify any issues that they thought needed either review or reconsideration or discussion. And I think that's all that Councillor Forbes is doing, and whether that's shared with the rest of the council is another matter. But I did indicate that she has the opportunity, of course, to identify any concerns or issues that she's got and have that discussion with council.
Thank you very much. So I'm gonna take that course of action now. We're going to create an opportunity for the public to make comment. At this point, the speakers list I have is Bev Parslow, followed by Lyle Craver, followed by Peter Teven. So at this point, I'm going to invite Bev Parslow to come up to the microphone here. Welcome, Mr. Parslow. You have 3 minutes to address the council.
Okay, I have two sets of questions. If I don't get to the second set, I'll email you them. First of all, this is regard to the safe roads. If we have studies to show that slower speeds mean less danger for pedestrians, why in heaven's name are we going into an experimental mode? The evidence is there that the faster the vehicle is going, the greater the effect on the pedestrian. I looked everywhere to see any study that shows the faster you go, the less danger there is to the pedestrian. They do not exist. The next point is, if such a program, and this is interesting because I'm repeating what some of the councillors have said, if this program is implemented, it's essential that we have more enforcement. We have much more enforcement than we have now, because I feel even now, the enforcement in North Vancouver District is not effective. I'm pleased to see that I may also add that perhaps technology could be an answer to speeding. I'm pleased to see that the local residents can take part in this process. I would again suggest that citizen participation is essential. As an original member of the Bike Task Force some 30 years ago, I'm pleased with the ideas in this program. I'm also pleased that Vision Zero has come up several times this evening, and I think it should be adopted as an approach. Now, I would also like to thank Ingrid Weisenbach and Steve Carney for their work. Okay, I think I looked at both papers very thoroughly. I thought they were really well done. Going back to the introduction, when we talked about traffic in general, I still have a few questions, and I probably won't get all the way through. The bump out on Evergreen has been on, it's been off, it's been on, and it's become a pilot project with final construction next year. At the last visit, little seemed to have been done. When will there please be action? 2, I cannot remember the number of times I've quoted for the traffic on Dilbrook. It seems that 15% of all the cars are going in the region of 65 kilometers an hour. We have requested a traffic calming plan for the entire road. Again, when will there be any action? I send information on speed bumps, as Donegal is denied a 30-kilometer limit. Costs compared to other municipalities were high. Now has the council changed? Have the costs for these speed bumps been reduced? And last but not least, okay, well, I'm sorry. Can I finish off? Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Donegal Place has requested a 30-kilometer speed limit by overwhelming numbers. It seems that this kind of priority for us as citizens is not a priority for the district. When will the average citizen be able to request speed traffic calming on their streets, bearing in mind that district speed bumps appear to be high? And last but not least, and this was answered, it would be really good if the Vision Zero was adopted as the philosophy for this program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Beth Parsley. Next speaker I have is Lyle Craver. Mr. Craver,
Okay, Worship. Most of my comments tonight were intended to be with respect to the second part of the meeting, which we have not in fact gotten into. However, I do have a couple of comments on what came up tonight. First off, in her introductory comments, Councillor Murray mentioned several things relating to traffic congestion in the area in and around the Seymour Squamish Nation lands. One thing in this context that probably should be reviewed by the councillor is that there is a existing contract dating back to the early 1980s between the Squamish and DNV. I don't have the exact date on it. However, it was signed by Mayor Bell in his first term of office and by Agnes Hilson. I've got a copy in my filing cabinet somewhere gathering dust. I'm sure DNV does as well, but I would urge Councillor Murray to review that contract because it does give the Squamish some rights concerning the exit areas around their reserve lands. Anyhow, I am completely appalled that the staff report in the first portion of this slow street study describes 29th Street as a success story because the area between the top of the hill on 29th Street and Lynn Valley Road and 29th requires drivers to make no fewer than 7 lane changes along the way. The reason why we have slower speeds on 29th Street is that people are trying to avoid getting into trouble on a section of roadway that, frankly, because of the traffic quote-unquote improvements done by the city of North Vancouver who were in charge of that road construction, really made a mess of it. And if you have to change lanes that many times in about an 8 to 10 block section, then you've got a problematic piece of road. And it's difficult to imagine anybody at DNV signed off on that construction way back when, but what we have is what we have, and it's a terrible piece of road that I avoid whenever I have the opportunity. Good session tonight. I do think that in having attended over 100 Zoom meetings in the past year, that from a technical point of view, your Zoom crew at the district have done an outstanding job, both in terms of sound quality by the councillors and in the way the windows on the Zoom have been presented. So kudos to all of you. I enjoyed the meeting. I look forward to hearing what you may have to say about the second half. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments, Lyle Craver. The next speaker I have is Peter Teven.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Welcome. You have 3 minutes to address the workshop.
Oh, good. Thank you. No Mickey Mouse microphone this time. Thank you very much, Your Worship and Council. Just a few thoughts. First of all, on the overall workshop tonight, I think that it was a great disappointment that the quote annual transportation workshop or update was not described in the agenda package. I think that has done a great disservice to the people of North Vancouver that they were not able to see that and respond by attending. On the Slow Streets Initiative, one hypothesis that is presented is that slower speeds lead to result in the chance of somebody dying growing less, or as speeds go up, the chance of them dying grows more. And I certainly accept that hypothesis. But there's also an additional hypothesis to consider, and that is as speeds go down, driver distraction and the chances of an accident with injury might go up. So I think that should be studied as well, because if you force people to lower speeds, will they become distracted? And maybe people aren't going to die, but maybe our minor injuries are going to go through the roof. I got to tell you, as a citizen reading the idea that we're going to conduct a test with 3 separate control groups, I found quite alarming, because I want you to consider that if you're prepared to test this and leave a control group to provide a baseline of statistics, really what you're doing is you're using people's lives as data points. We hire experts to these jobs to know their business. And I'm really reluctant to go playing test sample with someone's life and safety. If you know it's safer, then it's up to you to make the decision. But to put in a test to see how much it aggravates people. The last thing I want to say is this, that in the global picture of Metro Vancouver, and the city of Vancouver particularly prides itself, and having lived here since 1962, I've certainly been aware of this conversation. City of Vancouver prides itself that years ago it made the decision not to allow any highways to go through the city. And we have basically in the district, wholly known to the district, we have 2 east-west routes. We have the highway, and we have Queens to 29th to Kirkstone, and down over to the Parkway. That's it. So certainly you're not talking about slowing those, because those are all arterial at this point. But I want to just submit this to you. As you encumber or leave encumbered the highway, people turn to use the side streets as highways. There's the problem. Increase throughput on the highway, you will improve safety on the side streets. Because if people can't get through where they're going on the highway, they're going to find any other route to get there as fast as they can. And really, can you blame them? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stephen. Okay, Council, I think we've had a really good discussion about this item. I hope it's informed staff on the areas that maybe we need to go back and forth on, just a few other elements on what a pilot might look like. But I think you're hearing that that generally there is council support, with some opposition obviously, but for moving forward in some form. So we'll carry the matter forward to a regular meeting of council for decision on phase 1 at this point. The last comment I wanted to make before we just wrap this matter is, it's interesting with in hockey, when they had a whole series of really, really bad injuries that were occurring with forearms and shoulders and everything. And so the solution was to go and armor up and put armors on the elbow pads and all of these other things. And surely what happened was the arm injuries went down, but the flip side was people ended up hitting harder and moving faster and feeling more carefree and cavalier. And so in the end, it actually resulted in more injuries because people were hitting harder and more severe injuries. And I think, that might be where we're at with a little bit of the philosophy around driving, is that drivers feel safer than ever behind the wheel. With our anti-lock brakes, our airbags all over the place, modern early braking and warning systems. But what's happened is the risk has shifted. The driver feels safer, but the pedestrian feels less safe because they're being bared down on by larger vehicles, heavier vehicles, less attentive drivers. And so we, as the builders of the infrastructure, have to decide how best to protect the more vulnerable person in that situation. So I don't want my comments tonight to be interpreted as critical. I just want to make sure that we have effective pilots, that we are really focusing our resources on where the real risk is. But I do understand the comments made about Vision Zero being adopted broadly. So at this point, Council, I'm inclined to say we've completed the business of the first item, and that we're going to table the second item to a future meeting of Council. It probably will happen. I don't know if you can propose a date at this point, or if that's something we'll have to be able to talk to staff about. We're going to have to look at the staff calendar and also have to figure out what kind of an update for 29th would be warranted at that time as well. So at this point, I'm going to thank everybody for their participation, staff, council, and members of the public who participated. We do appreciate you engaging in these matters and all of the work that staff put to get us to this point in discussion. Once again, on behalf of the council, thank everybody very much and have a great week.
Thank you, Mayor Little. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thanks, Steve.
Hey, thank you.